And we are very, very excited about our set of speakers and about what will happen and what we will learn today. Well, there might have been multiple reasons why you decided to come here. Maybe you wanted to see whether Brian Nosek's talk lives up to what its title promised, or maybe you want to learn all the secrets about how to publish an SPPS from Semino Zier. And you will do that later, actually. But whatever brought you here, we are also very happy to have you here. And we want to hear your questions and your input. So we hope that there will be plenty of time for discussion. And if there's not enough time after each individual talk, there will be the lunch. There won't be a roundtable discussion because, as you can see, there are no roundtables here. So feel free to mingle with the speakers during lunch. And well, based on your interest on this pre-conference, we thought we'd make some recommendations for other things you might be interested in. So tomorrow morning, for example, there is a professional development session chaired by Katie Corker on open science and how you can translate it into daily practice. Then right after that, there is a Q&A with journal editors. On Saturday morning at 8 a.m., there's another professional development session about, well, that's a panel discussion, I think, about the recommendations to align academic incentives with scientific best practices. And then right after that, there's another journal forum on statistics and reporting controversies. All right, so this is maybe something you want to put on your schedule. And I think we can start now with the best talk of this pre-conference.
This is a good talk.
Anybody else? So you are probably already aware that our conference organizers are notorious pranksters. So when I got an invitation 10 months ago to present at a symposium called Navigating the New Era of Social Personality Psychology, I was very confident, okay, this is a prank, I'm getting punked here, I'm not going to fall for it. So sure, I'll play along a little bit, yes, I'll do that. And then they say, great, okay, and then they say, oh, we got these other speakers too, and everybody's on the email, and they say, oh, so can you submit your abstract? Okay, you're really going for it here. All right, I'm going to submit a crazy-ass abstract and call you on this, trying to fool all of us into being part of this thing. And they said, great, that looks good. So, oh, okay, so this is a game of chicken. Fine, I'll play along, I'll keep playing along. Yeah, I'm involved. All right, yeah, I'm scheduling the time. Oh, we're going to do dinner. So now Eli says, oh, that abstract looks great. So, okay, he's in on it too. So now it's only me that's part of the scam. So fine, we all go on. And so I wonder when we're going to call it and say this isn't actually happening, and they never called it. So of course I'm going to show up, but I'm not going to be so dumb to prepare a talk. And then when I start my talk, they say, ha, not really a conference. So how much time do I have left? Okay, all right. So we will go to it. So thank you for the invitation. This is fun. So what I want to talk about is the mindsets that we are, in our lab at least, trying to approach the work that we do in this notion of trying to improve, change scientific practices. So this is relatively unstructured in the sense of just trying to talk about some of the things that we use as what is the culture of our lab and how do we talk about the work that we're doing and try to do the best work that we can. And so I'll just give a couple of examples. I'm hoping that this actually will be quite short so that we can have lots of discussion, because I think these issues are very worth discussing rather than just being lectured. So a first mindset that we try to embrace as much as we can is that every claim that we make is wrong in some fundamentally important way. Right? Newton's laws of mechanics are wrong. Most successful theory ever, they're wrong. Right? In fundamental ways, they're wrong. Einstein showed with special relativity how they are wrong. Einstein was wrong. even though that is an enormously successful theory and replaced by quantum mechanics. So even things that we would put up as the best exemplars of what it is that research, what science can produce in terms of understanding the world are wrong. They're all incomplete. So the process of doing our science is a process of uncertainty reduction, improving our models from how wrong they are now to be less wrong over time. And that is, can be a very hard thing to embrace because we don't want to spend our time doing stuff that's wrong all the time. But that's really what science is all about. So that's one mindset. A second is that we aim to embrace the fact that we are stupid in the work that we're doing. And what I want to point you to, if you haven't read it, is this great one-page essay by Martin Schwartz. If you Google and Google Scholar, importance of stupidity, in quotes, this will come up. And you can read it while I talk because it's way better than what I will say. And it's actually really, it's so good that I want to read the first 2 paragraphs of it just to sort of get the point and then talk about it. So this is how he opens. I recently saw an old friend for the first time in many years. We had been PhD students at the same time, both studying science, although in different areas. She later dropped out of grad school, went to Harvard Law School, and is now a senior lawyer for a major environmental organization. At some point, the conversation turned to why she had left grad school. To my utter astonishment, she said it was because it made her feel stupid. After a couple of years of feeling stupid every day, she was ready to do something else. I had thought of her as one of the brightest people I knew, and her subsequent career supports that view. What she said bothered me. I kept thinking about it, and sometime the next day it hit me. Science makes me feel stupid too. It's just that I've gotten used to it. So used to it, in fact, that I actively seek out new opportunities to feel stupid. I wouldn't know what to do without that feeling. I even think it's supposed to be that way. Let me explain. And then the remainder of his essay explains what he means by this. It means that he's studying things he doesn't understand. That's why he's studying them. We're not going into investigations with a strong knowledge base to say that's what the answers are and let's just confirm them. We're going into things because we don't understand them. And the feeling of stupidity is the feeling of wonder, of let's discover here, let's learn some things, let's unpack what these things I don't understand. And the excitement in science is having some insight, of seeing some discovery that changes a way of understanding something, knowing still that that's wrong too. It's just another step in the process of becoming less stupid over time. So the two of those things, so for our approach and how we try to do our science, is to prioritize getting it right over being right. Being right is focused on the content. I want to publish something to tell you this is how it is. And if my success, my sense of self or as a contributor in science is focused on being right, then your questioning my content is a threat, right? I have to defend it rather than getting it right, which is focused on the process, which is open to revisability, which is open to being wrong. In fact, showing how I'm wrong is an opportunity for me to be less wrong over time because I'm already assuming I am wrong. I am wrong. So if you can help me figure out where I'm wrong, I should say thank you, not you're an asshole. Because that is the collective effort we are all in, figuring out where we are wrong and trying to become less wrong over time. So that is easy to say. It's not necessarily easy to live because it does hurt when people criticize the work that we do. We do get invested in the things that we claim. We have beliefs that we are investigating in the lab, prior beliefs before we investigate them. All of that stuff is in the mix. We're not free of those passions, ideologies, beliefs, and everything else. And simultaneously, even when we talk about in the lab about how can we improve this, what can we do better, can we be our own best critics, nonetheless, we can wonder if the same attitude is shared by people outside of the group. Right? I can say, yeah, we are focused on process, we're working on getting it right, we want to ask exciting questions and get as far as we can. If we're wrong, we're wrong. And we are wrong, so we'll be wrong, let's figure out how. But there can be a worry of, well, hiring committees won't appreciate that. They are going to evaluate content. Tenuring committees aren't going to appreciate that. They're going to evaluate content. And so there's a potential disconnect between what I think what I want to do, how I'm trying to do my work, and how I think I'll be evaluated. what the reputational stakes are for me for if I am wrong, rather than just focused on improving what I don't know. So this is particularly acute in replication. So I have a little bit of data. Mostly I don't have data at all, but I have a little bit of data. And this is a survey that Charlie Ebersol, Jordan Axe, and I did. And the summary here is of about 5,000 US adults. And we presented it, we did a replication with 300 researchers, so the patterns are very similar. But we gave a very simple scenario. This is how research works, this is what a scientist does, this is the publishing process, and here are some simple situations. And we want you to evaluate the science based on this minimal amount of information. And I recognize it is minimal information, but that's how it is in doing the research. So it's simple scenario research. So the baseline at 0 is researcher X, I found an interesting result and published it. Now you are researcher Y, and so what we had people do is evaluate the person, researcher X, on how able they are in their research, their quality as a researcher, how ethical they are as a researcher, and how true the result is that they found. So in one scenario, the follow-up to researcher X I found an interesting result and published it, is that you succeeded in replicating it. So what you're seeing is moving to the right is that from baseline, the solid line in the middle, my ability, my ethics, and the truth of the result that I found go up. Right? Someone else succeeded independently replicating my result. If you failed to replicate my result, then I lose a bit. Right? The truth of the effect, people believe in it somewhat less. And this is effect size measure, Cohen's D at the bottom here. My perceived ability is somewhat less, so I do take a reputational hit for you failing to replicate. And even my ethics takes a slight hit. That's a very tiny effect there. Those 95% confidence intervals, this is 5,000 people. So this is a very precisely estimated result. But there is nonetheless an effect there. So those are two baselines, and they leave still open this possibility that we are externally evaluated on our content rather than our process. So we did some follow-ups with adding a little bit to each of those scenarios. Right? So you failed to replicate my result, and then I criticized your method and said your result's not valid. Right? The truth doesn't shift anymore from just you failing to replicate, but my perceived ability and ethics go down with only that much information. You might immediately think, but oh, there are scenarios where in fact the person did screw up and pointed out it is useful and everything else. There's lots of additional qualifications we could do to probably move that around in this. But with just only that information, my just criticizing is a way to hit my own perceived ability and ethics. Alternatively, you fail to replicate my result, and then I agree and say, well, that initial result might not have been correct. The perceived truth of that result goes down even further, but I get a reputational boost in my perceived ability and especially in my perceived ethics by being responsive to an independent person's evidence. Even further, you fail to replicate my result, and then I just started another study to figure out why we got different results. Truth actually even goes up a little bit of that original result. Even though it's the same scenario of the original failed to replicate, there's no additional information about replicability, but people now have pulled truth up of, oh, still studying, the person is committed to understanding that phenomenon, I'm not yet ready to give up on it, and my perceived ability and ethics go way up. Right? These three provide a clear indication that even among just general US adults that aren't invested in the daily practice of science are evaluated on process. The person that is responsive, is investigating the information, is following up on knowledge, is a scientist that's acting according to what they perceive how scientists are supposed to act. There's a couple of more. So I published that initial result, and then I publish a failure to replicate myself. Right? Truth in the result goes down, but again, my perceived ability and ethics for having done that practice increase compared to baseline. Right? I fail to replicate my result, and then I look at it and say, oh, no, that study was bad, so I'll file draw that one. Truth in the result goes down, so does my perceived ability and ethics, right? I'm squelching my own research in order to preserve the content of that original result, rather than appreciate the process that might make me question that result. And the last one that surprised us at first particularly is I did a study, found an interesting result and published it, and then I didn't follow up. I moved on and did other things. The perceived truth in that result goes down, as does the perceptions in my ability and my ethics. That's a surprising one. We can talk about that more. But my initial interpretation is that the interpretation of that is not actually appreciating process. The average person can appreciate that one study is not definitive. It's just initial evidence. And so just moving on to other things isn't in their intuitions about how that should be done. Okay, so that's some data. So pulling that together,
Can I ask you?
yeah, please.
Have you asked participants also how they perceive why the person replicates?
We haven't done it yet. We would like to do more about the reputations of the replicator. And then also lots of additional complexities in these, unpacking these scenarios. They're very simplistic, but that's all we have for now. Thank you. Okay, so Paul Baltes, who passed away 4 or 5 years ago now, I think it was, a very accomplished, brilliant developmental psychologist. He would give advice regularly to people as they were writing their papers to make sure that the evidence comes first. Yes, promote that theoretical explanation, include that, we need to understand that, but what actually persists in your contribution is the evidence. Because the explanations are wrong, they will be replaced, sometimes they're really wrong, but the evidence you provided, if it was done with solid methodology, if it was useful evidence that isn't just completely confounded, then any explanation has to account for your result. So make sure that that is what's front and center of what your contribution is. And it also was an implicit message of the importance of process, that the way in which to get evidence that will persist is to make sure that your process, your methodology is as strong as possible. And yeah, great, do the best you can to provide good, compelling explanations, but accompany those with process as well. So I want to give one example of how we're sort of trying this in practice ourselves in the lab in terms of pre-registration. Now, my assumption is that if you're coming to this pre-conference, that you're already pretty aware of a lot of these issues and what the various initiatives and suggestions for improving practices are. So I don't want to get into this in depth, but there's 2 aspects of pre-registration. One is in order to remove the file drawer effect, right? If we pre-register that studies exist, then they're discoverable. Then we can see what gets into the literature if that's biased in some way compared to the research that's done but doesn't get in the literature. That's an important part. The part of pre-registration I want to focus on is pre-registration of analysis plans. And the purpose of that is to make the clear distinction between confirmatory research and exploratory research. Right? Confirmatory research, we're hypothesis testing. We have a hypothesis in advance. We acquire some data in order to evaluate, test that hypothesis. Exploratory research is discovery. We have data, and we use that data in order to understand, get new insights, discover things that we can't anticipate in advance, that aren't pre-hypothesized. And both of these are ordinary practice in our lab. I presume they're ordinary practice for most of us. The challenge, of course, that we face is that it's hard in the daily practice of doing our research to tell which one we're doing because we're constantly changing how we're thinking about the problem. We are interacting with our data as we do it. And so it's very easy to have the feeling as we discover in our work that this is stuff that we had thought, that this actually is hypothesis testing, and without seeing that we are making many decisions along the way, without recognizing how our beliefs in our responsiveness, the data contingent decisions that we're making are being made. So the pre-registration is a means of making that distinction very clear. What is it that you plan to do in advance with the data, and what is it that you didn't? And just make clear which one is which. That's the primary contribution. So there is evidence about this that we know it makes a difference. Pre-registration makes a difference in what research gets done. And we know that the thing that I worry about for our own work, of us sort of interacting with our data and then being pulled towards some kinds of findings because they look better for us, they are more publishable, they're more interesting, whatever, biases our search in that data and ends up producing results that are less reliable than if we had not pursued that flexibility. But pre-registration has been the law for clinical trials since 2000, I think it was, 15 years of experience of pre-registration being a requirement for publication in clinical trials. And there's a lot of evidence. I just want to highlight a couple of things that you may not have seen before. One is the Compare Trials website. So you go compare-trials.org. This is Ben Goldacre and his colleagues. And what they're doing is they're going to the registrations for clinical trials, developing new drugs or other therapies. This is right in the pipeline before these actually get into patients' hands. They go to the original trial that's pre-registered with what the primary and secondary outcomes are, and then they go to the report that was published on that trial and compare them. So they checked 69, this is updated real time. So when I took a picture yesterday of the site, there's 67 trials checked to date. 9 of them were perfect, meaning what was said are the outcomes of interest are what are reported in the paper as the outcomes. There were, across the trials, 301 outcomes that were in the pre-registration that were not reported in the paper. And there are 357 new outcomes in the paper that were not in the pre-registration. Right? So decisions were being made between the pre-registration and the output that were not distinguished as these are new outcomes. Right? It wasn't in an exploratory results section or we're leaving these things out. Their criterion here is there's no mention of this at all. They're just reported as the outcomes. They're also, we don't have to get into this, but they're also writing letters for each of these. As they review a trial and they see any discrepancies, they write a letter to the editor of that journal and then submit it, just saying here are the discrepancies. 6 of them have been accepted, 16 of them have been rejected, 31 are in the peer review pipeline. So this is causing all kinds of hubbub in the clinical trials world. That same thing does happen in our work too. So it's not just in clinical trials that information is changing between what is registered and what's reported. We don't have pre-registration pervasively in our field, but there are pockets where this occurs. And one of them is tests, time series experiments in the social sciences. So Franco, Malhotra, and Simonovitz published this year in SPPS analysis of the protocols that were registered in order to have the project be done in the test. You have to apply like a grant in order to get access. You have to write down exactly what you're going to do, what all the outcomes are, everything else. And then they compared it against the published report of that study. 40% of the articles reviewed, there was I think 32, these are all psychology studies, 32 psych studies, 40% of them left out one or more experimental conditions from what was actually in the study. And then 70% left out one or more outcome variables. And it wasn't random whether things were included or left out. So of the reported tests, the median p-value was 0.02, the median effect size was 0.29, and 63% of them got p less than 0.05. Of the outcomes that were in the protocol but not in the report, not mentioned in the report, 147 tests total, median p-value is 0.35, median effect size 0.13, and 23% of them were significant. So the things left out are much less rosy in terms of positive results and effect size than the things that were in. So these are occurring in our own practices as well. Moreover, back to clinical trials, Bob Kaplan and Veronica Irvin did an initial study, and they're now following up with a large-scale study of looking at a sample of clinical trials from that Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. And their key finding is that they compared prior to pre-registration being the law to post pre-registration being the law. What happened with the primary result, the outcome, right? Once pre-registration is in place, the primary outcome is defined in the pre-registration. Prior to the pre-registration being required, who knows what the primary outcome was? It wasn't written down, at least not publicly. They found that the positive result rate was 57% prior to pre-registration being required, and 8% positive result rate, significant effects afterwards. Right? That's an astonishing shift. It's a small sample and it's a single study. They're now doing this on a much broader scale of clinical trials. So for us, the core aim is let's do a little bit better in our process today than we did yesterday. We're incrementalists, right? We can continue to improve. We don't have to go to some idealist state instantly because we don't know how to get to some idealist state, and it may not be practical, may not be feasible. But instead, we can look at what we do now and say, are there things that we could do a little bit better, right? And we can confront ourselves with evidence in order to say, is there something here that sort of encourages me, requires me, given what my goals are, to think differently about how I do it. So one question we can confront ourselves with is, would I be okay with someone I love receiving treatment based on clinical trials that were not pre-registered or for which reported outcomes changed after the data were observed? Now, my guess is that you have the same intuition as I do, which is, no. I'm very glad that pre-registration exists and that these kinds of discrepancies can be detected, because this has real consequences for people. So that might be an easy thing to embrace. It's also not completely uncommon to have the feeling like, oh, but that's important. What we're doing in the lab, is it important? Well, if this is really the argument that we're going to make, that our work is not important enough to do it as well as we can, then why should we spend our time on it in the lab? Why waste our time if we're not going to put the effort in to do the best job we can in order to get to quality inference, in order to try to give other people what we have found so that they can do something with it and perhaps turn it into things that really do have consequence. It may be a few steps removed, but these clinical trials were based on preclinical work, which were based on basic science work. And it all depends on the quality of the evidence being pushed forward into some kind of application. So if I'm not willing to do it as well as I can, then I'm not actually giving those that are trying to turn that into applicable knowledge an opportunity to do it efficiently or effectively. So we've worked on how we can improve practices sort of as a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly exercise. And this is just pictures of people in the lab that have something to show. And since about 2012, we have pre-registered everything that we do in the lab. And when we started, so this was Jeff Spies, who created the, that's Jeff. His dissertation was to build the open science framework. And so that, it was a very unusual dissertation in psychology, but that's what it was. And as soon as he had sort of the alpha version ready, we started to use it to pre-register our studies. And the first thing we did was, instead of saying, okay, what is the perfect, let's define exactly how we should pre-register, is let's just write down what we can write down as we're starting the study. What is it that we know about what we're trying to do here? And so it'd be sort of a narrative paragraph of, this is what we think the study's about, this is what we think we're going to do, this is how we think we're going to test it. That was better than what we had done the day before. Right? We get the results back, we do our analyses, we check against our pre-registration, we said, oh my gosh, we should have written down how we were going to exclude people. Why didn't we think of writing down how we could analyze this? That's so easy to do. Let's write that down the next one. So the next one was more elaborate. Right? Third one's more elaborate. And each time we get confronted with our own pre-registrations of how we can do this a little bit better. Right? And we also discover things along the way, like, oh, it seems like this is going to be a real pain in the neck to pre-register all the time. Well, it turns out that once we start pre-registering, when we're in a particular research paradigm, the work that we did for the study 1 actually is very, very relevant for the pre-registration for study 2. And in fact, if we're just extending a paradigm, we have an analysis script that's now very well defined for what we're going to analyze, how we're going to analyze it. We just have to tweak it. And so we can end up with an analysis script that's pre-registered. It is exactly how we're going to analyze those data. And we know all of our exclusion rules, we know all of these different approaches, so we can get much more elaborate each step we go. And in fact, we can confront ourselves constantly with different kinds of research that we're doing. So another example is Charlie's Pretis. And this was, we've been finding things about the distinction between implicit and explicit evaluations, and we've been studying religious attitudes. And there's this interesting result that people who are not religious or were formerly religious, particularly Christian in the US, still have implicit favorability towards Christianity, even though explicitly they report strong negativity towards Christianity compared to other religions. So we wanted to try to figure out, what's going on? Why is that happening? Maybe it's about previous experience. People who were formerly Christian, maybe they're different somehow than people who were never Christian at all in the US. And maybe it's how long ago that you left Christianity. Maybe it's the circumstances that you left, or whatever it is. There's lots of different things that might be contributing. So we have a data collection going with some interesting measures, and we start to think about our analysis plan. And we're trying to say, okay, we want to figure out what is our confirmatory design here? What are the things that we actually are testing? And we genuinely, as we're looking at it, could not sort of say, these are the things that we think we should study. There's too much of an open landscape. So it wasn't going to work to have a regular sort of pre-registration of this is how, this isn't a confirmatory. We are very much in exploratory mode. So what we decided to do instead was split the data in half for each of the 3 studies of the Predes. He takes the first half and analyzes it crazy. Do whatever. Just get into the data, discover what you can. And then from that, we come up with, oh, this is some interesting things. This is what we want to evaluate. And then we define a confirmatory plan based on our initial exploratory data, and then analyze that. So the Predes has 3 studies, and we deleted all of the exploratory data. We can't trust, we're in total exploratory mode. Certainly the p-values are not trustworthy, but even the effect sizes, because we were condition seeking it very freely, would be biased as well. So we ignore that data, and it only reports the confirmatory tests of each of those 3 studies. We wouldn't have ever thought of doing it that way in the way in which our work happens until we were confronted with wanting to see if we can test our hypotheses, actually think about what we're going to pre-register. You can go see the paper there at osf.io and the N7TO. There it is. Okay. So one really quick pitch then, and then I want to close so we have some time for discussion. We, at the Center for Open Science, we announced a few weeks ago the pre-registration challenge. So if you are intrigued to try this, this is a good occasion to try it, because if you pre-register through this workflow and you end up publishing that result, then you could be eligible to receive $1,000. So the goal from the center's perspective is to stimulate awareness and education about pre-registration. Let's try it. Let's see if this provides value. Our presumption is that the outcomes will be similar to our own experience with it, which is once you try it, it's hard to imagine not doing it. Because the planning process of thinking about what is this project actually for, what am I trying to do, reveals what's actually, I am testing some previous ideas versus, oh, I have no idea. Let's explore and not feel guilty about exploring, because we shouldn't feel guilty about such things. So I encourage you to go try it out. There's lots of education materials and everything else, and we can talk more about it. So let me close with one last point, and a mindset point. And that is, there in all of this, right? There's emotion in the discussion about the new era of social personality psychology. There's concern about how others are going to evaluate us. There's perceived risk in doing new things or continuing to do old things because of how someone else might react. So the approach that we take is informed by, excuse me, Steve Martin's Secret of Success. So Bill Moyers was interviewing Steve Martin. He says, "What's the secret of success?" Steve says, "I know the answer." Bill says, "What? What is it?" And Steve says, "Be so damn good they can't ignore you. Be so damn good they can't ignore you." Right? His claim for success is not figure out what people need, worry about your reputation. It's do the best damn job you can. And whether they like it or they don't like it, they'll have to pay attention to it. Right? They have to wrestle with it. And that's the contribution that we can make in doing our science. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Well, there's plenty of time for questions and comments.
Right.
Yeah.
In looking at the clinical trial stuff and the Neil Malhotra's stuff, you say that there was 23, one of the facts was 23% of the unreported findings were statistically significant. Why weren't they reported? Like, what is the narrative for those?
Yeah, I don't know the answer. They don't get into it in the paper. So it would just be my speculation. Do you have one yourself?
No, I mean, it sort of begs a question. So one version of thinking about this, I'm so used to always assuming everyone is casually sinister in their science, right? So I expect it to be 100% of them are going to be they're all going to be non-significant. But the other version, you just say, well, what if everybody is trying to be pretty good and making sure they tell the right story, then you would say, I want there to be more of the significant results talked about, because those need to be explained either because you say that's true or because you say it's sampling error. Whereas the non-significant ones have such an easy story, you're like, well, I don't want those to get played up as much. And so it's not totally obvious to me what the right answer is for what Neil should have found in that.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, there's lots of bias, so I'm not saying everything's good, but I don't know what the normative data should have looked like.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah.
So one thing I struggle with pre-registration. What if someone pre-registers everything and they constantly get null effects? By the 20th study, they get something that's significant. Do they then have to correct their p-value for all the studies that they didn't find significant, even though they're completely different studies?
So, yes, in the sense that if you are only going to report the ones that are significant that come out, then you're going to generate significant results by chance frequently, even with pre-registration.
I'm saying if they're completely different studies. So I do study 1, that doesn't work, I go to a new topic. I do study 2, that doesn't work, I go to a new topic. I do this 20 times.
Yeah. Yes, and no matter what the content of the studies are, you should get significant results some portion of the time, perhaps 1 in 20, just by chance, whatever the content, whether it's the same content or different content. So no one study stands on its own as definitive evidence, right? So in one pre-registration on its own is not a cure-all. Because replication still matters, increasing confidence still matters, looking for generalizability still matters, looking for condition seeking still matters. All of those things inform on the confidence that we can have in any one phenomenon. Pre-registration also can be abused in the sense that I could say, okay, I'm going to do these 100, I'm going to pre-register my 100 ways I could analyze this data. They're all pre-registered, right? So now I'm good, right? If I only report 10 of those ways, then I'm still taking advantage of the things that increase the likelihood of false positive results. And even if I report all 100, but it's just overwhelming, so I only talk about the 3 that are really interesting. Oh, they're all in the table, but here's the results I want you to focus on. And I'm still seizing the advantage in an interpretational sense on the likelihood of raising false positive results. So there isn't a single solution to any of this. We just have to be aware of the fact that there's uncertainty, and that uncertainty accumulates as we do more research.
So you give the typical argument in favor of pre-registration, which is the self-delusion argument, the garden of forking paths. That, I mean, some people may just really be cheating and know they're cheating, but I think the more compelling argument that most people have settled on is the idea that we ourselves don't realize the extent to which we're learning from our data and updating what our a priori hypotheses, our perception of what those a priori hypotheses were. My concern has always been about the pre-registration space. I think it is a very valuable tool. My concern about being a default tool under all circumstances resides in this space of anything other than infinitely confirmatory is exploratory, this dichotomous thinking about it. Now clearly it exists on a continuum where you could just run a correlation matrix with 5,000 things and find the asterisks, and let's all call that exploratory. But that's what I think of when I think of exploratory. I don't think of, oh my God, like that is just what I had in the pre-registered plan, except I forgot that I'd also assessed it in the diary portion of my study. But I think from your logic, those are the same, right? That is or in Wagenmacher's logic, you can't conduct a hypothesis test. So my question for you is, what is the effect size on self-delusion? Like, do you anticipate that my ability to delude myself into what my a priori hypothesis tests were, is that an R of 0.1, an R of 0.3, an R of 0.5, an R of 0.9? Right? And I think, because the conversation to me sounds like what advocates of pre-registration believe is that the R is about 0.9. Like the effect is absolutely gigantic. I can delude myself to believing pretty much anything about my former beliefs. Is that your view?
It's an excellent way of framing the question because I can't answer it. This is great. What I would say is that it's unknown.
Yes.
And the other part that's unknown is those reasoning decisions of, of course, decision, right? I have those all the time. Oh my God, of course we need to do this, right? Of course. But why am I saying of course? It's because my expectations were violated as I was analyzing the data, right? Oh, it didn't quite come out, but oh my gosh, we forgot to do that. Oh, of course. Whereas if it had come out right the way the first time, I may not have had the of course moment. And it's just an unknown.
Unknown.
Right? It is an unknown.
Yep.
And so what the value that we get out of the pre-registration is that there is a known. This is what we knew in advance. This is what we plan to do in advance. And we have almost all of them have a correction. These are things that we changed as we were analyzing our data. And this is why, right? And just being transparent about that lets you decide, oh yeah, they were stupid in the advance. They should have thought of that.
Just very quick follow-up. Do you think it's okay to conduct a hypothesis test on those things while being transparent about saying this wasn't in the pre-plan, we think it's close enough, but the reader can judge?
So the short answer is yes, in the sense that, of course, you can do anything, and being transparent, fine. Let the readers evaluate, right? For me, the one thing that I really want to have happen is transparency of process. Do what you want to do, and then let's fight it out, right? Someone else will say, I wouldn't have done that. Okay, fine, you run a new study. Do it in a more restrictive way, see if you get the same result.
I just wanted to push back a little bit on your closing remarks about the idea that you can be so good that they can't ignore you. I think it's hard to argue against a lot of these things, but you can, if you are that good, it seems like they can ignore you. You're going to have a messier story, you might take longer to publish it, you won't look as good on paper when you're applying for jobs. So I think that if you're good with these suggestions that you're proposing, it might even be easier for, the hiring committees and the general public that's spinning the, pop psychology stories. Everyone, it might be easier to be ignored if you're really good.
Yeah, so I should clarify, it's a good point regardless of my clarification, is that by good I mean performance, not moral.
Right,
doing the best quality research that you can do.
But to that point too, good quality research is messy. The story's not clean and
That's right.
catchy and flashy and
That's
elegant. It, so even good in that sense, I think
Yeah.
still that it, especially when you're competing in a market against people that might, consciously or subconsciously, oversimplify a little bit or underreport or be a little bit less transparent, because that's the stuff that gets consumed by journals, by editors, by the general public, by hiring committees, by pretty much every incentive we have in the system.
I certainly agree with all of those the circumstances of those incentives and how they are strong. So this ultimately is a personal decision in the sense of I recognize the culture is this way. I would like to behave this other way. What do I do? Right? Do I decide I'm not going to behave according to my principles in order to achieve, or because at least that's my perception of it, or am I going to just do the best job I can with the approach that I think is the right way to do it, and have some trust that the system may shift in order to reinforce it? And that is trust. There are people that are arguing about these issues. There's increased understanding of the importance of sample size, of confidence intervals, of thinking about messy data as being the reality of what's happening in the lab, and being transparent with it. Right? So we've written papers where we do it the way we want to do it. The editor says, no, put the theory in the front and tell a great story. Our theory was in the discussion. He said, no, that's not how we did it. And so paper was rejected. Okay, but we published it somewhere else. Is that, did we hurt ourselves? Maybe we did.
Yeah.
But for us, that was the important part. We can't decide for other people. We can only decide for ourselves. But it is a very important point.
I think it's a different question too. I'm a fifth-year PhD going on the job market, and so I think that's something that's maybe, at least in conversations I have with the stuff about people, neglected. What your sort of options are at different stages in their career, trajectory for making these decisions in a way that you feel okay about at the end of the day.
Right.
Sorry, we're gonna have to move this about getting off the discussion.